As the final pages of the 2025 calendar turned, a verdict emerged from an unexpected quarter that has cut deeper than most, branding Meghan Markle the most disappointing celebrity of the entire year and exposing the widening chasm between the grand promises of reinvention and the rather more modest realities that unfolded in Montecito, a judgment delivered not by distant critics but by the very Canadian city that once offered her sanctuary during her suit's years, and where Prince Harry himself has publicly thanked the place for giving him a wife. One senses the particular sting of that hometown verdict, for it arrived at the close of a 12-month period sold as their triumphant American chapter, only to be remembered instead for a slow, almost inexorable deflation of hype that left even sympathetic observers shaking their heads. The atmosphere surrounding the Sussex household in those final weeks must have grown thick with a mixture of disbelief and quiet recrimination as the couple confronted not scandalous collapse, but something perhaps more wounding: the polite, cumulative shrug of an audience that had simply stopped caring quite so much. In private, one can picture her replaying the year's carefully staged moments with mounting frustration, wondering how the carefully chosen collaborators and glossy launches had failed to translate into the cultural dominance she had envisioned, while the financial pressures of maintaining their elevated lifestyle without the cushion of royal infrastructure added an unspoken layer of urgency to every setback. Yet, for all the outward composure, this public designation carries consequences that will linger well beyond the new year, subtly eroding the leverage they once enjoyed in Hollywood negotiations and reinforcing the narrative already whispered in certain circles that their post-royal brand has lost its novelty and its novelty its value. I'm glad you've joined me as we begin to unpick the layers of this development. The opinion piece that delivered the blow, written by Patricia Treble for the Toronto Star on the 30th of December, laid out the timeline with clinical precision, reminding readers how the year had opened with such apparent promise on New Year's Day, when Meghan posted that barefoot video of herself tracing the numerals 2025 in wet Californian sand, an image clearly intended to signal fresh beginnings after half a decade of self-imposed exile from royal constraints, followed swiftly by the trailer drop for her Netflix lifestyle series With Love, Meghan, the announcement of her rebranded venture as ever produced in partnership with the same streaming service, and the launch of a podcast ambitiously titled Confessions of a Female Founder. A well-placed source within the Sussex orbit has since confided that she approached each of these milestones with the sort of focused intensity one associates with someone determined to prove every doubter wrong, perhaps rehearsing in her mind the narrative of the self-made woman who had traded palaces for purpose. Yet as the months wore on and the projects met with lukewarm engagement rather than the viral embrace she had anticipated, that inner certainty appears to have curdled into something closer to disbelief and defensive anger. The surrounding pressure must have been immense, with the relentless gaze of tabloids and social media compilers tracking every perceived shortfall, turning what should have been a victory lap into a slow parade of unmet expectations that even her most loyal staff struggled to spin positively. Long-term, this verdict risked hardening into a permanent footnote in her public story, the moment when the aspirational Duchess became, in the eyes of many, the cautionary tale of ambition untethered from delivery. And one cannot help but wonder how that realization sits with Prince Harry, whose own quieter projects have increasingly seemed to exist in her considerable shadow. What makes the Toronto Star's assessment particularly wounding, of course, is its origin in the city where she spent 7 formative years filming Suits, a period she has repeatedly described in interviews as one of genuine belonging and creative freedom before the royal spotlight altered everything, and where the couple made their first joint public appearance at the Invictus Games in 2017. A source behind closed doors has revealed that the piece landed like a personal betrayal, leaving her reeling with a mixture of shock and something approaching shame, because it came from a place that had once represented refuge rather than judgment. In the days that followed publication, the atmosphere within the Sussex compound reportedly shifted from defiant optimism to a more subdued recalibration, with whispered conversations about whether the year's setbacks stemmed from external sabotage or internal miscalculations, while the financial realities of their Montecito estate and the private security that accompanies their chosen independence continued to loom large in the background, demanding results that simply had not materialized. For a woman who had positioned herself as the architect of her own destiny, the inner monologue must have been a turbulent one, cycling between resolve to double down on future plans and moments of raw frustration at an audience that seemed determined to withhold the validation she craved. The long-term consequence here is subtle but profound. For branding someone the most disappointing figure of an entire year does not merely wound the ego. It subtly closes doors in boardrooms and talent agencies where perception is everything, potentially forcing the couple into ever more desperate pivots that could strain both their resources and their partnership further. Compounding the verdict was the relentless online chorus that turned 2025 into something of a public audit, with multiple viral YouTube compilations titled Variations of 40 Times Meghan Markle Was Called Out in 2025, racking up millions of views by cataloging everything from awkward promotional flourishes to defensive media responses that only seemed to invite further scrutiny, each clip presented with the sort of forensic glee that suggests the public appetite for such reckonings remains undiminished. A longtime family acquaintance has suggested that these montages played on a loop in the household during the quiet evenings, prompting her to question aloud why every gesture, no matter how well-intentioned, seemed to be dissected for inauthenticity, while the surrounding media pressure created an almost siege-like atmosphere in which even routine appearances carried the risk of fresh dissection. One imagines the inner tension she must have felt, balancing the need to project unshakable confidence for the cameras with the private acknowledgement that the carefully constructed image was fraying at the edges, especially as reports of staff departures continued to surface and fuel speculation about directionless leadership. The consequences stretch forward into 2026 and beyond. For once a narrative of serial disappointment takes root, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to dislodge, affecting not only future deal-making, but also the couple's ability to present a united front to the world, and perhaps more poignantly, to themselves. And so, as we move into a new year, the question lingers for those of us who have watched this story unfold with a mixture of fascination and, yes, a touch of worldly skepticism. Whether this moment of public reckoning will serve as the catalyst for something more substantial, or merely another footnote in a saga defined by grand entrances and quieter departures, a saga whose next volume remains, for now, unwritten.